I can't hear you. We can't hear you, Parveen.
Oh, apologies. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. Can I just please check if it's okay for people if this is broadcasted or recorded on YouTube? If anyone has any problem, please keep your cameras off. Okay. Okay. So thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Let's just give another couple of minutes as people are joining us. We are expecting more than 100 individuals on this call today. So if we can just wait for a couple more minutes, that will be great. Thank you.
Parveen, do you want to start and other people will join?
Okay, so Ash will keep on having people inside, letting them into the room. So thank you, everybody, on joining us today. Here we are to celebrate International Nurses Day 2023. The theme for this year is Our Nurses, Our Future. This event is organized by University of Sheffield, Sheffield Teaching Hospitals, and Doncaster and Bassetlaw Teaching Hospitals. We do this every year and take this opportunity to kind of celebrate nurses' contribution and learn from each other and basically highlight what we do as nurses. So if there is anyone who doesn't know what International Nurses Day is, I doubt that is. But anyway, International Nurses Day is celebrated on 12th of May every year. This day is the birth date of Florence Nightingale, who is seen as the mother of modern nursing, though it's contested these days, but that's what we do. So the theme for this year is Our Nurses, Our Future, which is a global campaign and sets out what we want for nursing in the future in order to address the global health challenges and improve global health for all. We need to learn from the lessons of the pandemic and translate these into practice. So we have got a very good line of speakers who will be able to share their views about the topic and what they have learned, through their careers. Please keep your microphone muted. If you have to give any message or write something, please use the chat box. If you have any questions, depending on, we have got quite a few speakers, so we will try and take some questions, but please keep writing your question onto the chat box and we'll be able to answer those as we move forward. Okay, and so without further ado, I will ask Dr. Sam Davidge, who is Director of Education and Research at Doncaster and Bassetlaw Teaching Hospitals, to introduce our first speaker. Thank you. You're mute, Sam. You're mute, Sam.
Let me.
Yes.
Oh, it's let me now. Okay, sorry, you wouldn't allow me to unmute. Thank you, Parveen. Thanks, Ash. So yeah, my name's Sam Davidge. I'm the Director of Education and Research at Doncaster and Bassetlaw Teaching Hospitals. I'm very proud to be an NMC registrant, and it gives me absolute pleasure to introduce our first speaker, who's Karen Jessup, is the Chief Nurse for Doncaster and Bassetlaw Teaching Hospitals, and clearly my Chief Nurse. Karen qualified over 25 years ago, joining Hull University Hospitals in 1995, where she spent the first few years of her clinical career, holding a variety of roles within clinical care and surgery. Karen has progressed to become a matron and then divisional nurse manager, and also qualifying as a registered midwife with a BSc in midwifery practice from the University of Hull in 2007. And in 2016, Karen went on to complete the Elizabeth Garrett Anderson programme, gaining a Senior Leadership Award from the NHS Leadership Academy. and a master's degree in healthcare leadership from the University of Birmingham. Karen joined Sheffield Teaching Hospitals in 2016 as a nurse director for operating services, anaesthesia and critical care before successfully being promoted to the deputy chief nurse role, a position she held for 5.5 years before moving on and becoming our chief nurse here at Doncaster and Bassett Law Teaching Hospitals. Karen has a keen interest in safe staffing, becoming a CNO England Safe Staffing Fellow in 2019 and 20. And I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Karen to give us the honour of opening this event. So over to you, Karen. Thank you. Hopefully Karen's not having the same problem of unmuting. So hopefully Karen is able to speak and we can hand it over. Can you hear us, Karen? Are you able to access?
Hopefully you can hear me now. Yay! Right, so somebody is kindly driving my slides for me, so
Yes,
thank you very much to whoever's doing that. Thank you. So hello, my name is Karen Jessup and I'm the chief nurse, proud chief nurse of Doncaster and Bassett Law Teaching Hospitals. I'm delighted to have been invited to join you today on International Day of the Nurse 2023 to open our celebrations with colleagues joining us from both DBTH and Sheffield Teaching Hospitals, both of which are hospitals that are close to my heart. Thank you so much first, before we start, to our Professors of Nursing, Paveen and Julie and Ash and other colleagues for organising today's agenda. It's not an easy task, particularly not organising chief nurses, I'm sure. I won't keep you very long as you've got a great agenda this afternoon for the next couple of hours, but I've been asked to spend a short time on the topic of our nurses, our future, and how we make the invisible visible. Do I get to do the next slide, please, thing? Excellent. Next slide, please. And then if you can just click again for me, I assume it's Ash. So for those that don't know, I didn't, these are two famous magicians, Harry Houdini and David Copperfield, both of whom have apparent expertise in the field of making the invisible visible. But I think our approach as registered nurses probably needs to be slightly different, as magic is not going to be able to help us articulate our value. Next slide, please. I'm loving saying that. We are, however, starting from a really great position. And as nurses, many of you may know, we are consistently viewed as the most trusted profession in the UK. And I've just put a little chart here from the 2022 Ipsos Veracity Index, which is Truthfulness Index or Trust Index, was no different, as demonstrated here. We've achieved 89%. Sorry, somebody's just kindly offering me a drink. Next slide, please. However, as you'll all be aware, and you don't need me to tell you, this is in the context of significant registered nurse and midwife vacancies nationally, as outlined here. And this is from the NHS vacancy statistics published by what used to be NHS Digital. We do have a great focus on recruitment nationally and how we encourage and support those who might be interested to join our profession. But we also have a really clear responsibility to retain our registered nurses as well. And how do we all, as colleagues and fellow professionals, encourage, support and celebrate our profession to ensure that we keep registered nurses in the profession as well as attract them to it? And I started by thinking about the following question. Next slide, please. What is our unique contribution as a registered nurse? And you sometimes see and hear conversations about this, don't you? And Virginia Henderson, in her definition of nursing, which was from 1966, which definitely predates me and probably all of you too, described the unique function of the nurse as to assist the individual, sick or well, in performance of those activities contributing to health or its recovery or peaceful death that they would perform unaided if they had the necessary strength, will, or knowledge. I would argue that this is still the case today, but I would go a step further, adding that we are uniquely placed as a profession to advocate for patients and their loved ones. We act in a vast and diverse clinical arena, and we utilise the nursing process to facilitate and support development of plans of care. Being a registered nurse is a profession of vigilance, and the presence of registered nurses, particularly those with a first level degree, is critical to the safety of those in our care. You don't need to take my word for it. There is extensive evidence to support this published nationally and internationally. Next slide, please. So how do we perform the magic? How do we make the invisible visible? We need to lift each other up and recognise the value in our colleagues and all contributions to our amazing profession. We need to recognise the challenges and work collaboratively to overcome them. We are stronger together and indeed the largest part of the clinical workforce of the NHS and beyond. We need to provide the evidence base for the uniqueness of our profession by encouraging, supporting and facilitating nurse-led research in all the diverse aspects of our roles. We need to do better at flexibility and supporting and role modelling work-life balance. And we need to be clear about our vision for nursing. We need to support our learners, not just students, but all those who are new to a role and need support and development. And we all have a role to play in lifting each other up. And we need to do more of events like this and celebrate our successes and shout it from the rooftops. Next slide, please. And it's not big and it's not clever. But when I started my career as a 16-and-a-half-year-old applying for nurse training, I worried for weeks about how I would answer the question, why do I want to be a nurse? All I could think about was the fact that I wanted to look after people. And in those days, I was quite limited in my thinking. And for me, it was about looking after poorly people. As I've grown in my various roles, I am very clear that this is about looking after all people. And if we don't look after people and we don't look after each other, they won't want to work with us and they won't do a very good job of looking after patients and each other. I was striving in those days for a really, really clever answer and I couldn't think of one. And whilst it isn't big and it's not clever, I now realise there is no better reason to want to be a nurse. Thank you. Next slide, please. And that's all I particularly wanted to say. Just need to hand over back to, is it back to Sam now or is Parveen?
Back to Parveen.
Back to Parveen.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Hope you have a nice afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, for a very, interesting and useful presentation. And apologies, everybody. I have not introduced myself, partly because I think in the nursing world, everybody should know me. So, but my name is Parveen and I work at the University of Sheffield and Doncaster and Bassett Law Teaching Hospitals as Professor of Nursing and Gender-Based Violence. So sorry for not introducing myself. And I should also introduce Dr. Ash Talpur, who is our Knowledge Mobilization Fellow working between University of Sheffield and Doncaster and Bassett Law Teaching Hospitals. And Ash is going to take the event from here forward. Thank you, Ash, for doing all what you do. Thanks.
Thank you, Parveen. Our next. Sorry. Our next speaker is Dr. Steve Robertson. Steve is a program director of the Research Alliance between the University of Sheffield and Royal College of Nursing. Steve has a more than 17 years experience of working in a critical care nursing and public health nursing. His main interests are around social theories of gender and masculinity and the application of these to the public health and health promotion. Today, Steve is going to talk about his findings of his rapid review on climbing the nursing leadership ladder. And yes, Steve, please go on. Steve?
Okay, I think I'm in. Thanks, Ash, and thanks everyone for attending today and for inviting me to talk about the rapid review that myself, Tony Ryan at Sheffield and Ash completed fairly recently. It's going to be a very rapid overview of a rapid review today, I'm afraid, so you'll have to bear with me. We've already heard from Karen why nursing is so important, and what I hope to show through the talk today is partly why leadership in nursing is so important. Next slide, please, Ash. Yeah, next. Great. So there's strong evidence to suggest that leadership's key to not only high quality patient care, but also to workforce outcomes. But few new graduates ever enter practice thinking about becoming nurse leaders. Most of us, when we think about the sort of things that Karen was just talking about, what motivated us to go into nursing, it was rarely the fact that you wanted to see yourself as the next chief nursing officer. So although people might be motivated to enter nursing, they're often not motivated into becoming nurse leaders, despite how pivotal this is to high quality care. Next, please. So we were working with the RCN on previous one, thanks Ash, on issues around continuing professional development in nursing. And one of the things that the RCN noted was a lack of clear and distinct career pathways into leadership, particularly for more junior nurses. And in recognising that, they asked us if we would conduct a review of the evidence around that sort of thing. And the review question that we focused on was this one. So what are the conditions that facilitate and restrict the movement of early career nurses into and along a leadership pathway? And within that, we focus quite a bit on motivation as well. Next, please, Ash. Yeah, next. So I'll just very quickly go over how we approached it. So these were some of the search terms that we used to conduct the search. We tweaked these quite a bit in order to make sure that the search was manageable. And these were the inclusion and exclusion criteria that we focused on. We were going to look initially at registered nurses with less than 5 years experience, but it soon became apparent that there was hardly any literature that just focused on that. So we did widen it and include studies that looked at the wider nursing workforce. So studies that didn't make comment on what stage of career the nurses were in, that the studies were conducted on. And similarly, in terms of exclusion, originally we were going to exclude advanced nurse practitioners and nurse consultants or matrons, and we decided to remove that exclusion criteria in order to obtain a little bit more information. Next, please, Ash. So just to give you an idea of the size of the literature, we started off with roughly 1,300 papers, 950 after duplicates were removed, and through the usual process of applying the inclusion and exclusion criteria, we ended up with 25 papers that were included in the final review. Next, please, Ash. So in terms of the characteristics of the papers, you can see here that there was quite a widespread. 6 of the papers were international reviews, and then there's quite a few from North America and a few from Ireland, Australia, England, and 1 each from Finland, Netherlands, and Sweden. Next, please, Ash. We didn't limit it by study design. So like I say, there were 6 international reviews, 8 quantitative studies, 6 qualitative papers, 3 mixed methods, and 2 case studies. Next, please, Ash. So I'm sorry if I've skipped through the search strategy so quickly, but if anyone wants to ask about how we approached the review, then I'm open to answering questions. So in terms of the findings, once we'd integrated the data that we extracted from the papers, we formed 4 sort of content categories, very similar to themes for those that are familiar with thematic analysis. And these were motivation for leadership, leadership and power dynamics, system and organizational leadership, and leadership needs development and training. And you can see hopefully on that slide that some of those have subcategories or sub-themes. Next, please, Ash. So when we think about the first findings around motivation, there was evidence that there were differences in motivation for nurses in relation to clinical leadership and wider system leadership. So there were some fascinating studies from North America, 2 quite large studies, that showed that motivation for leadership amongst nurses, and these were nurses of all grades, ran at somewhere between 15 and 25%. So only 15 to 25% of nurses in these 2 studies were motivated to become leaders. However, there was more motivation in relation to clinical leadership roles. So motivation to enter into sort of charge nurse roles ran a lot higher at about 55% in those studies. So you can see that there is a distinction in terms of motivation for leadership between clinical leadership, which many more nurses were inspired and motivated to do, and system leadership, which they seem to be less motivated for. There are certain things that impacted motivation, like educational level and formal exposure to leadership development. So for those that are engaged with specific leadership training and development, they were certainly more effective than informal approaches in leadership aspiration. So there's a few studies that highlighted that informal mentoring, for example, was nowhere near as effective as formal mentoring for leadership. It was interesting in Karen's opening talk just now, hearing about her motivations for going into nursing, which were very similar to mine. You know, this idea that you want to look after and care for people and help people. And several of the studies mentioned that motivation for providing high quality care and also for inspiring other nurses and people to do that was actually key to aspiring to lead. So one of the ways that perhaps you can increase motivation and inspiration for nurses to lead is by helping them recognise the links between leadership, even at a system level, and high quality care. Another thing that became apparent is that there was a distinction between the time needed to develop leadership skills. Obviously, it takes time to develop a lot of the skills and attributes required to become a nurse leader, and the point at which leadership aspiration and motivation was at its peak. So interestingly, studies that looked at timing of motivation suggested that more junior nurses were actually more motivated to lead, and that increasing age and increasing length of experience reduced motivation to lead. So there's a bit of a disconnect between when leadership skills are required and the point at which aspiration and motivation is at its peak. But I think what we can say is that it's important then to capitalise on early career nurses' enthusiasm about leadership and to provide opportunities to build on that. Next, please, Ash. So there was a lot of issues around power dynamics in terms of sort of facilitating or restricting people's ability to engage in leadership. So being empowered to develop influential relationships is obviously more difficult for those that are early in the career, but actually is essential, particularly as we'll see in a minute, for system leadership. You can't begin to engage in system leadership without having the status and the power to do that, because it requires complex sets of negotiations, often with other professionals and often with other organisations. So the requirement to develop relationship skills is a key aspect of developing leadership opportunities. There's evidence that enacting positive leadership can have an impact on those around the person and can actually help provide a perspective on leadership career trajectory as well. So there's considerable evidence that nurses often lack the status and power to develop or enact the leadership roles, particularly in ways that impacted at an organisational level. As I've said before, they were more confident in doing that in a local clinical setting, less confident in being able to do that at an organisational level. And that was compounded by organisation obstacles like time and staff resourcing. So poor staffing levels, lack of time. And it's no surprise then that nurses are enabled and empowered to flourish in roles when organisations recognise, value and facilitate the role of nurse leaders. So where an organisation values nurse leadership, it's easier for early career nurses to develop into that role. Next, please, Ash. So I've already mentioned quite a bit about system leadership and the fact that the wider focus of system leadership does need people to help facilitate additional networks and skills. So one of the things that became apparent in some of the studies was the important role that formal mentors can play in introducing earlier career researchers into the networks and contacts that they need to be able to enact their leadership roles within the wider healthcare system. Something else that was important is that there was a tension that early career nurses often felt in relation to leadership when they thought that it was something that would take them away from direct care. So part of the reluctance or part of the lack of motivation for leadership, for engaging in leadership, was about this feeling or belief that it would remove them from patient care. So exploring how you can align leadership with organisational values, goals and visions can help ease that disconnect. There was a couple of very interesting papers that looked at the development of system leadership in the pre-registration phase. So a couple of papers that looked at how pre-registration leadership impacted on confidence in particular and self-efficacy for leadership once nurses were qualified. Next, please, Ash. Oh, no, we've skipped one. So finally, we looked at the final theme, which was around leadership development and training. I've already mentioned about lack of confidence acting as a barrier to developing leadership careers. Importantly, when confidence is improved, trust in leadership decisions and judgments are improved, and therefore the desire to engage in leadership roles is improved. Formal leadership training and development opportunities is a recognised need. So several of the studies highlighted that nurses felt that leadership training was a need for them. So again, when thinking about sort of appraisals, etc., it might be good to always include leadership within appraisals, even within sort of like the preceptorship period, to help early career nurses get used to the idea of moving into leadership. So developing careers through formal training, making sure that you try to provide workplace leadership opportunities can help improve that confidence and skill. And it also can be beneficial to the organisation because it can help job satisfaction and staff retention, and therefore maintaining a positive workforce. I've already mentioned preceptorship and mentoring programs. Formal programs like this that have a focus on leadership skill can definitely help with assisting the facilitating integration and maintenance of leadership skills for nurses and the confidence that goes with that. And having direct opportunity to act as leaders. So going out of your way to provide direct opportunities to act as leaders for early career nurses acts to increase confidence in leadership and therefore leadership aspiration. So that was a very rapid run through a rapid review on leadership development for early career nurses. I believe that there might be time for questions, but I'll hand back to Ash.
We will, I mean, if anybody has a question throughout the presentations, please write down in the chat box. And then we will ask the presenters to answer the questions in the chat box, because we are running out of time. We have to manage. So thank you very much, Steve. And our next speaker is Gail Mills. Gail is currently the lead nurse for research and development at Sheffield Teaching Hospitals, NHS Foundation, and is also currently seconded to the role of executive research nurse, midwifery and AHPs, lead for the National Institute for Health and Care Research, Clinical Research Network, Yorkshire and Humber. Gail is going to talk about nurse contribution in challenging times, pandemic and clinical research. And I would like to invite Gail to present, please.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And thanks for having me here today. I'm delighted to be here on International Nurses Day. So as Ash has said, I wanted to talk to you about nurses' contribution in challenging times, about the pandemic, but obviously related to research, because I know pandemic time was challenging for everybody in a nursing role and other roles as well. As at the moment, I lead the research delivery teams in Sheffield Teaching Hospitals, and then I've just taken up a role that has responsibility for leadership across research for nurses, midwives and AHPs for Yorkshire and Humber. So with today being International Nurses Day and the theme being our nurses, our future, and making the invisible visible, it made me think about research nursing, which I think maybe not invisible, but certainly less visible prior to COVID-19 than it perhaps is becoming now. And I also think in terms of our future that research is going to become more prominent and continue to feature as part of the nursing role increasingly as we work and strive to improve the healthcare service that we lead. So I'm going to tell you a bit about research nursing, the COVID-19 pandemic, and some things about what the future holds, although I don't hold a crystal ball, so it'll just be the things that I'm aware of that we have opportunities for in our future. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I couldn't talk to you on International Nurses Day on Florence Nightingale's birthday without mentioning what a trailblazer Florence Nightingale was in terms of nursing research. So arguably an early nursing researcher, Florence made significant changes and improvements to care, seeking the evidence to reduce infections, for example, in her patients during the Crimean War. And it made me think that if this was possible in the 1850s, then it should certainly be possible for us to base our care on evidence now and make sure that research is part of everything that we do in modern times. Next slide, please. Thank you. So to the current time, and this is just a picture of some of my colleagues from the clinical research facility at the Hallamshire Hospital in Sheffield. And I thought this was a really good opportunity to dispel a few myths and share a little bit about what a clinical research nursing role is. So it's absolutely a nursing role, and it is clinical and it's patient facing. So clinical research nurses care for and advocate for patients while they're part of a clinical trial. They might support them to make an informed choice about participating. They help them to make that decision for themselves, and they monitor patients whilst on a trial, ensure their safety, report adverse events, they protect their rights, and they ensure the research protocol is followed and that the results are recorded accurately so that we're able to base decisions on robust research. So I've heard them be called the linchpin of clinical research, and that's the central bolt on a wheel, and I think that's probably quite an apt description of the clinical research nursing role, which is somebody that coordinates all of those elements to make sure that we're able to meet the end goal of delivering the research in a safe and effective way. Next slide, please. So I think research nursing is quite a rewarding role, but I wanted to ask some of my colleagues what their thoughts were. So a couple of them were happy for me to share their perspectives. So this is David, who works at the research facility at the Hallamshire Hospital, and he said that he really enjoys working with people who are taking part in research that are going to positively benefit both themselves and also for other participants, particularly if they've got challenging medical conditions. Next slide, please. Thank you. And this is Faith. So Faith is a research sister at the Northern General Hospital, and she was talking about the COVID-19 pandemic and the research that was undertaken during that time, and how it was great to be part of something that led to saving so many lives. She also said that she loves working in clinical research, and I absolutely promise I didn't pay her or bribe her to say that. Hopefully that was genuine. Thank you. Next slide, please. Lovely. Have we missed one there? Possibly not. No, that's fine. Thank you. So back to the pandemic and the research response. So according to the Department of Health and Social Care, they said research was a beacon of hope and shone a light on the vital role of clinical research in improving the health and care for all of us. And it absolutely was. What research did was provided effective and safe vaccines, as well as treatments that we could offer our patients, and was essentially the exit strategy from the pandemic. So in STH, we recruited over 3,000 participants into clinical trials during COVID. We supported 45 COVID-19 studies, which included 20 that were designated as urgent public health studies from the Department of Health and Social Care. That included 5 vaccine studies as well. And we also supported the studies that provided us with the treatments dexamethasone and remdesivir, which we could use as treatments for our patients. So I spoke to a nurse this week who worked in research at the time, and they said how incredible it was to be part of trialling a treatment one day and then seeing it being rolled out into care, into standard care the next day, so that patients on the wards were able to offer it the day after, which is quite unique in research. Normally it takes a very long time to get from the point of a clinical trial through to a treatment being offered as standard care, but things were really escalated and fast forwarded during that time. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this was not unique to Sheffield. It was scaled up across all of Yorkshire and Humber, and it was a combined effort. So across all of the organisations and hospitals in Yorkshire and Humber during 2021 alone, 170,000 participants took part in 640 clinical trials and studies across the region. But what that meant in reality is that patients in our region and people in our region were getting treatment, access to potentially life-saving treatment and to vaccines much more quickly than anybody else. So it was a real achievement. And of course, this effort was repeated across the country and globally. So it just shows what's possible when everyone's got a united goal and is working together. Next slide, please. I feel a bit like the Chris Whitty talks with the next slide, please. So, excuse me 1 second. So the Ruth Endicott is the Director of Nursing and Midwifery for the NHR, and she said during the COVID-19 pandemic that research nurses are key to helping health services become better, stronger and more resilient. And I think that's absolutely true, but I actually think all nurses have a part to play in terms of making sure research is part of how we make health services become better, stronger and more resilient. Next slide, please, Ash. Thank you. So research isn't just about COVID-19, obviously, and we need to research, and the teams who support research, to enable other breakthroughs across other specialties and other disease areas. So I've just pulled some good news stories in terms of the impact of research here from fairly recent bulletins, but we need treatments for multiple sclerosis and new treatments for motor neuron disease and new diagnostic tests. So it's just to show the impact that research can have more broadly. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we know that research can help us find better treatments, and it can help us to find vaccines for viruses and to improve care. But actually research has also got far greater benefits from that. So evidence shows us that research active hospitals have better patient outcomes, and that patients in hospitals that are research active have more confidence in the staff caring for them. We also know that research active hospitals have better staff retention, reduced staff burnout levels, and that research in hospitals obviously improves practice, but also reduces costs and increases hospital performance. Thank you. Next slide. So I've mentioned earlier about research becoming more visible, and the importance of research and nursing within research is becoming more recognised for the reasons that I've already described. And so we now have our first ever research strategy from the Chief Nursing Officer for England. There's also a similar strategy for AHPs, and both of these strategies essentially want to see research embedded in care and part of everybody's business. There's also now a midwifery research strategy, which I think hot off the press was approved yesterday, so will be being launched quite soon. And what I'm saying with this is not that everybody needs to become a research delivery nurse or to become a clinical academic nurse, although those are options, of course, but it's more about using the evidence base for our practice and to support our patients in having access to research as part of the care, if that's what they would choose to do. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the CNO strategy's got 5 themes, which are there on the screen for you. But they're all about essentially making sure that the research we do is relevant to the patients and of benefit to them, releasing potential from our nursing workforce. And that's about the whole spectrum of research, from those who can support it in their normal roles that aren't purely research, those who are involved in delivery of research, or those who are in more leadership roles or leading nurse-led research. I mean, it's also about us maximising and utilising the digital potential for research as well going forwards. So in STH, Julie McGarry, who's here today as well, and myself and colleagues are working together to develop a strategy locally for STH to implement this at local level. And when that's launched, with it will come lots of opportunities for people to get involved. So I'd encourage you to watch out for the launch of that. Okay, next slide, please. So in terms of how you can make research your business, and I'm only going to cover a few of the opportunities and potential here. But the first thing is about that evidence base and using that behind practice. So the library services in the NHS these days is absolutely fantastic. And I know at STH, you can go to the librarian with a question or something that you need more understanding of in terms of the evidence behind something that we do and our practice, and they will undertake a literature search on your behalf and provide you with the key literature on the topic. So they make it really easy to do that. If you wanted more research awareness and how to support a patient on your ward who was part of a trial, and what good clinical practice is, and the governance around clinical research, there's some new research awareness training that will be added to PALMS very soon, so you can also access that. There's also a bit of a plug here, but we've got a nursing midwifery and AHP internship programme, and the 3rd cohort of that will start in September, and the call is open to applications for that now. And that is funded time, 1 day a week, to release nurses, midwives and AHPs from their normal role. They're given support, mentorship and some training so that they can undertake a project in their own clinical area in order to improve practice or improve care in that area. And so I'd encourage anyone who's interested in that to either get in touch with myself or to visit the Clinical Research Office website, where all of these opportunities are available within STH. And those who want to think about pursuing a clinical academic career, there's various schemes, including the NIHR integrated programme. And again, you can find links to all of that on the website. There's further investment coming. It was announced from Department of Health and Social Care, some investment for underrepresented groups of research, which includes nurses, midwives and AHPs. So again, there'll be more opportunities for everybody to get involved. And they want those opportunities to be more inclusive and more open to all of the workforce. So I'm conscious that I've showcased sort of STH opportunities, but if you work outside of STH, you can either get in touch with me, or I'm sure Parveen would be happy to be contacted, and we can direct you to the right person if you work in a different organisation. Next slide, please. And so I'd just like to say happy International Nurses Day, and also to the midwives for International Day of the Midwife earlier in the week. And thank you very much. My contact details are there on the last slide. Thanks.
Thank you, Gail. Thank you very much for such a great presentation. Our next speaker is Gavin Portier. Gavin is the head of OD, EDI, and well-being at Doncaster and Bassetlaw Teaching Hospitals, and has a business in coaching and a workshop. Through this experience as a certified coach and registered nurse, Gavin will talk about the power of organization and a relationship coaching with nursing team and how it can build morals, improve the well-being of nurses at work, and in doing so can lead to better and safer care for patients. Gavin, please.
Yeah, thank you, Ash, and happy International Nurses everyone. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. So today's talk obviously is about International Nurses Day and making nurses visible. I think for me, what I wanted to talk about is about how through my nursing experience, my journey, and then through my academic learning, how I've been able to find ways to create resilience, not only within myself, but with my teams. And so what we'll do, we'll go through my nursing journey. And I'm quite proud of my nursing journey. It's been very unorthodox, but hopefully when you hear me explain it, you'll see that nursing is a wonderful profession. And I think with so much of the negativity around nursing currently, how are we meant to inspire nurses if we aren't always giving them a very positive and rewarding image of that? So I'll get on with the slide. So next slide, please, Ash. So who am I? So I'll start with explaining the pictures on the screen. So in the top left-hand corner, obviously, or maybe not, I've got an Australian accent, and I did my nursing back in Australia in the 90s at University of Technology in Sydney. And when I finished my Bachelor of Nursing degree, I got a postgraduate scholarship through Royal Prince Alfred Hospital. I worked in liver and renal transplant, and then part of that program, I went to cardiac intensive care. And after a year, I moved to another part of Australia, which is the top right-hand corner. You'll see the beach and the sea. And just as nursing is, it creates opportunities. And I've got into community nursing in a very rural part of Australia. And I went from working in hospitals to going out to country homes and seeing old people with their legs, ulcers, and taking bloods and doing dressings, and then running a small work in a small hospital. I had to do the ED, the ward, the midwifery, and it just opened me up to loads of different experiences. And what I want to get across in this part of my presentation is that nursing, if you're curious, can offer you so much. And I guess if there's any new nurses who are on the presentation today, is that the world's your oyster. And I really want to reinforce this, is that if you're in an area of nursing that isn't floating your boat, look elsewhere, be courageous, because it is really rewarding. So in 2000, I left Australia and I came to sunny Sheffield for climbing. But because I had an intensive care background, I did loads of agency work. I worked at Sheffield, teaching hospitals. And then I did lots of agency, like I said, around the north of England. And then I took a period out of nursing, and that's the height safety business on the left-hand side. And then in 2010, I came back to nursing, but through running a business, I'd learned some other skills, and I became a nursing home manager and transferred my knowledge around person-centered care and supporting families in intensive care to elderly care and complex dementia. And I specialised in complex dementia for a good number of years. And whilst I was doing that, I did my Elizabeth Garrett Anderson, like Karen did. And I learned all about values-based leadership and how I was a leader and how I came across. And I got into OD work, and that's where sort of leading to where I came today. And I became the manager for CAMHS in Rotherham, with the emphasis of not being a mental health nurse, but to support those teams through a really difficult time. And using those leadership skills that Steve was talking about, and providing safe spaces for people. And then I wanted to get back into acute care, so I became a matron at Barnsley Hospital, and then in later years became the head of nursing quality and understood governance. And when COVID came, because I had all these years of experience, I went back into intensive care for the first 2 years, and I was working away from the desk. I wasn't a keyboard nurse anymore. I was back working clinically, and I loved it, to be fair. And it reminded me of the power of working with colleagues and the importance of being kind to one another. And it sort of refueled my desire to be about coaching and organisational development and teams and values. And so I started investing in my coaching and mentoring program, and now I'm a qualified coach and mentor, and did relationship-based coaching. So that's my sort of background behind where I am today. Now I'm head of OD at Doncaster Bassett Law Teaching Hospitals, and part of this role is I'm head of wellbeing, and I see wellbeing as like an iceberg in the thing. So quite often we hear about wellbeing as the nice things, you know, the visits by animals into organisations, the teas, the cakes. But for me, from what I've understood and learnt about wellbeing at work, it's also about job clarity and how we support one another and how well we work as teams, because it's our relationships within the teams that keep us happy and together at work. It's the cups of teas and cakes are nice, but if we're feeling well supported by our colleagues, it's going to keep us at work. Or if we've got troubles at home and we're supported by our colleagues at work, we're more likely to come back to work. And so it helps us stay in work, and work becomes a support mechanism. So for me, wellbeing at work is about having very good people around you in the workplace. Next slide, please. So part of my coaching is about relationship systems intelligence. And one of the things about systems work or teams coaching is there's 5 principles. And the 5 principles are displayed on this slide here. And teams are always moving and they're always creative. And sometimes what we do when we work in systems is we take away that ownership and that ability to create and to think. And that's where people become apathetic and withdrawn from the organisation or withdrawn from each other. So part of the coaching that I do with nursing teams is reconnecting them with that and shining the light on these principles of systems working and empowering them and giving them activities. And being a nurse, I'm able to work alongside them, so I can do some observations and see how they are with each other, and we reflect that back into the coaching activities that we do. Next slide, please, Ash. And one of the things, so obviously being a coach, where everyone talks about coaching conversations and powerful questions. And the questions that I quite often ask teams, especially nursing teams, is what do we need from each other when things are difficult? And it's a really important question that I say to people to ask, is because, say, if you come onto a shift and you're short-staffed, or you've got you're a community nurse and you've got loads of patients, quite often people don't ask us what we need. They assume what we need, and sometimes that is counterproductive for us. So having these important questions, like what do we need from each other, I always say to teams, ask them in your handover at the start of your shift, what do we need from each other today? Because if you have these conversations, and also the next question, which is equally as important, what don't we need from each other when things are difficult? Because by taking the time to invest in communicating with each other, you understand what people need and don't need. And that will be different for each people within the team. But that's how teams get through difficult moments, is through communication and creating relationships. And one of the other things that I talk about is what is the best case scenario we can get from this situation. And so what I do is I get teams to work through that and actually have these conversations, say, what do we want from today? Or what do we want from this situation? And what needs to happen? And we agree to that. And it's really important that we communicate and we're open and honest about what it is that we want, because then that's how we can get some positivity through really difficult times. Next slide, please. So there's a couple of really important elements around well-being and compassion that I see as integral at being a nurse and being in a nursing team. And one of those is the culture and behaviours of your team and humanising your environment. And I've got on the screen here some things around that. So seeing the person and not the role. So quite often we hear people being called the matron, the nurse associate. We're people, we have names. And when we're called by a name, it means something to us more than being called the nurse. And we always talk about person-centred care through the way we look after patients, but are we person-centred with each other and with our colleagues? And so we all have lives outside of work, and quite often that life outside of our work creeps into our work life. And so if we understand more about our colleagues, then we can support them at work, which goes back to my point earlier about supporting people through difficult times. We are in a business providing care for people, and that includes our colleagues and ourselves. And one of the other things about building resilience through difficult times is creating healthy habits within your own practice, but also within your team. So creating a checking in process with each other during your time at work. And that doesn't matter, that can be if you're on a ward or anywhere, but get into that healthy habit of checking in with each other. Are you okay? Is there anything that you need me to do? It's those sorts of things, because if we don't ask those questions of each other, then people feel isolated, they feel lonely, they don't feel safe at work, they feel vulnerable. Choice of language. So, you know, again, we always talk about using preferred names for patients, but do we use preferred names for each other as well? You know, bed numbers, diagnosis. So my personal hate is, coming from dementia background, is people get called the dementia patient. These are people, and those that have worked in elderly care, they bring so much more than just their diagnosis when they come into our care. And if you invest your energy and time to understand who they are as people, you get more out of it yourself by providing that care. Appreciate people in your environment. So as within your teams, how do you appreciate each other? Do you make a brew for each other when things are difficult? You know, do you actually, in your team meetings, do you stop and do, in your team huddles, do you actually congratulate each other or give each other pats on the back when things are going tough and saying, well done? Or if you recognize one of your colleagues has been going through a really difficult time at work or been assaulted by someone, do you go up and appreciate that was difficult for and offer them some support? These are the humanizing elements that we can all do. And it doesn't matter where you are in that sort of nursing structure. It is just about being kind and humanizing your environment, reminding each other and yourself that we are people. And partly accepting that we won't agree on everything, and that is normal, because quite often it's the conflicts that happen within our working lives that make big splits on that. And so just accepting that conflict is normal and that we deal with that in an appropriate way, which I'll go through shortly. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, I've just timed up. My screen's just logged out, so bear with me a minute. For those that are working at DBTH, they'll appreciate the joys of presentation mode. There we are. Sorry, folks. So psychological safety. So going back to what I was saying, so another big aspect of what I talk about, compassion and building resilience is that psychological safety. And I've got a quote there, which I won't read. I'll let you guys read on the screen. But what West talks about is that interpersonal trust and respect and relationships, and that coincides with the relationship systems coaching that I talk about. But for me, the other part of providing psychological safety and being an advocate of that, regardless of where you are in your nursing team or organisation, is be the person who acts and behaves with professional integrity. You want to be the person that people can rely on, that they can turn to you when times are difficult, because it's that trust in you and the way you hold yourself, your behaviours, that will help people through difficult times. So in this slide, there's a short little video clip, and Asha, would you mind just playing that clip for us?
I think we might struggle with the clip because we will have to go to another window.
Okay.
And we can try it, but what if we just send a link to everybody later on? Would that be okay, Kevin?
Yes, thank you. Yeah. So that clip, I'll talk it through anyway. So Simon Sinek, people may know him, is quite popular and famous for positive coaching and positive mindset. And his video talks about creating environments where it's safe to talk about feeling vulnerable. It's safe to talk about when things go wrong, and psychological safety provides a forum or a space in which we as nurses, when we're feeling uncomfortable, if we make an error, it's okay to put our hands up and say, oh, I've made an error. And if we don't have these environments, then people don't people don't speak up when they're feeling vulnerable. They don't speak up if they feel that they don't know what they're doing. And we are in the business of providing care for people. And sometimes, if people aren't sure what they're doing and they go ahead and do something, that patient or service user may come to harm or worse. So watch that video, and he summarized by just saying, be kind to one another, and hopefully that's coming across with the presentation I'm talking about today. Next slide, please, Ash. So one thing I want to really get across is we as nurses, or we as people, we have the greatest influence on our own well-being. And so these are the questions that I give to people that I coach and to the teams that I work with is, when things are difficult, am I responding with my best self? And that's really hard to do. It really is hard to do. But if you bring positive energy into a difficult situation, you will have a better chance of having a better outcome than rather than bringing in a negative, bringing your worst self in and upsetting people in the way. It's about what energy am I bringing to this environment, and it is easy. And when we get together, if you've got one or two people with a negative energy, it soon spreads to the rest of us. And if that's the last thing you need when you're when you go through difficult times, you need that hope, and that hope will come through positive people. Again, going back to that question I had at the start, what do others around me need and don't need? And look to your teammates for solutions. And I think, and this is just my own personal reflection, I think we as nurses really need to look to ourselves for solutions on what we're going to do around situations that we find ourselves in, and not look for others to provide the answers for us. And I think Karen spoke about it earlier. It's about lifting each other up and being supportive for each other. And we are a very powerful workforce, but, and we should tap into that and really acknowledge that. And by doing that, it's about appreciating each other and celebrating the efforts that we do through difficult times, but also celebrating things outside of work and recognizing that we are people. And the final thing is, which I've already addressed, is modeling ethical behaviors in good times and bad. And you don't need to be a leader to do that. Leadership is a quality that we bring into our space, into our workspace. And even as nursing students or newly qualified nurses, we have that choice to model ethical behaviors in good times and bad. And if that's the best that you can do, hopefully you can inspire someone else to do the same. And if you get enough people modeling those behaviors, then the toxic behaviors and negative behaviors soon become the minority, and then people will feel safe to challenge them. Next slide, please, Ash. So as nurses, there's loads of support out there for you. You've got mentoring and coaching. And I personally, this is one of the reasons why I got into coaching. Coaching shouldn't be available for just directors and people that sit around boardrooms and things like that. We need to make coaching and mentoring available to nurses, nursing associates, healthcare support workers, because it's really hard work that we do. It's really tough. And having a coach and mentor will help people develop themselves, and then they become competent and are able to solve their own things. We have the new PNAs, which are out there to support people, and join the networks. And maybe within STH, there's a network of nurses that you can join, but LinkedIn's an obvious one. And I'd like to finish up with self-compassion. There is more to life than working. And if your cup is empty and you're not looking after yourself, your patients and your colleagues will suffer. So look after yourself, and there's nothing wrong with that. And on that note, I think that's the last slide. So hopefully that's inspired some people that nursing is a fantastic profession. Inspire newly qualified nurses and people out there to be nurses. It's given me so much in my life. It's taken me all around the world. So happy International Nurses Day.
Thank you, Gavin. It was a very interesting presentation. And now our next speaker is Jenny Tegao. Jenny has more than 25 years experience of working in different healthcare specialties and settings within the UK and the Philippines. During the pandemic, she became the first Filipino Chief Nursing Officer's BME Nurse Advisor for COVID at NHS England. Her work stream related to scoping and engaging with the UK-based and international nursing and midwifery associations, and initiatives aimed at improving the pastoral care and professional support of internationally recruited nurses and enhancing their collective voice. She is currently on secondment as a head of global at the Florence Nightingale Foundation. Today, Jenny is going to talk about international nurses and their contribution to healthcare. Jenny, please.
Thank you so much, Ash, and thank you for inviting me, and happy International Nurses Day to everyone on this call. So I always start with my talk asking, are we learning from history? And as you can see on those photos, in the NHS call in the 1940s, there was the Windrush generation where we had the Caribbean nurses coming in. And then it's interesting what you find on Twitter, because I didn't realize there were already Filipino nurses as early as the 1970s. And the colored photo on in the middle is a photo when I first arrived in Birmingham Heartlands Hospital, and that was in 1999. And there were 33 of us in that group. And again, 25 years on, it's like a pattern. 2023, we have the 50K program, and we are recruiting more nurses internationally. So I've been asked to talk about the contribution of international nurses to healthcare. Next slide, please. And I always start with this essay, which really influenced me, where Simpson proposes that there was a collective amnesia in Europe with regards to the contribution of migrants into the NHS. And we know very well, as I've said in that earlier slide, how dependent we are with an international workforce to support nursing and even the medical profession. And if you click, Ash, and what is being proposed here is that we learn from history by engaging with the different ethnic minority communities. And that is by recognizing their innovations and contributions. The proposal of Simpson was actually that is the struggle with migrants. Sometimes they don't belong. And I will show you a couple more slides in terms of what I found out in my role as a nurse advisor at NHS England. Next slide, please. So in November 2020, I was asked to scope and engage and connect with the different international nursing and midwifery associations so that we can enhance the pastoral and professional support of the newly arrived nurses in the 50K program. And when I'm talking to the individual members, there are the issues that come through with regards to, it's a similar pattern when I did the learning from the history roundtable with the Windrush participants. And you can see the common themes there of the need for shelter, the need to have a sense of purpose, the slow and the lack of career progression for the nurses. How do they feel that sense of belonging? How do they get valued for their contribution? How are they empowered to speak up? And to me, these are still issues that are coming to the fore in this day and age. And if you click, Ash, and everyone would be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where when you do find that you are meeting the basic needs of air, water, food, shelter, you go further up and you feel psychologically safe, you have met those safety needs. And then there's love and belonging, the self-esteem, and further up is the self-actualization. And why am I pointing this out? Because a lot of the nurses that I have spoken with in this exercise of scoping the different ethnic minority communities, international nurses, have this advocacy now to help other nurses in their journey. And if you look at the definition of self-actualization, it's the desire to become and the most that one can be. And in the next slides, I will cite to you some of the international nurses that I hope you'll recognize, and some are not as known, and some are very well known. Next slide, please. And to date, we have 33 international nursing midwifery associations, all representing these countries that have come to the UK, 26 nationalities. But again, these are nurses who have established themselves, and now they want to help their communities. And you can see they're wanting to support the new countries, new nurses that arrive in this country, and then providing support for the other nurses who have established here, who may not have progressed as much. The giving back aspect, the voice that's needed, and that representation to make sure that their issues are heard. I think this is a breakthrough in terms of that recruitment history of the UK, because now we have a network of these different international nursing and midwifery representatives from different communities. Next slide, please. So I'd like to introduce Jessica Gudsa, and she's the lead chair of the Zimbabwean Nurses and Midwives Association. And I'll read a little bit about her, and maybe some of you would have met her, but she was born and educated in Zimbabwe. And she has been working in the community as a look after children's nurse specialist in Oxley's Foundation Trust. And then she moved to Maudsley, where she worked as a project development nurse. But the other side of what she does is she's the chairperson of the Zimbabwean Nurses and Midwives Association. And they won just recently in our event celebration, as they had the best small grants presentation and the small grants project. And what they did was to set up like a bereavement support for the nurses who have come to this country, and also set up and help financially struggling nurses in their community. And she also supports in Zimbabwe the parents with children who are diabetic, and she has set up a support group there. And she's very passionate about giving back to her country, but at the same time, making sure the nurses who are coming from Zimbabwe who have arrived here are also being supported. The other one I'd like to introduce is Primrose Magala, and she is one of my INMA, International Nursing and Midwifery Fellows, and she comes from Uganda. And what she said really struck me, and I'll read from her testimony as a fellow, that when she had this development, and she started her career many years ago, and with the right support, she is able to do these things now within the UK, where she is an ophthalmic nurse specialist, but at the same time able to assist again and give back to her country. And she has prompted an educational camp where, of course, her specialty was ophthalmology. And she has supported 4 ophthalmic nurses in Uganda to train with the collaboration of HEE. And then she is also active as a Ugandan Nurse and Midwife Association as their fellow and as an ambassador for the newly arrived nurses that have come here. Next slide, please. And here comes Sajan Sathian, and he comes from India, in Kerala. And he is, when I met him 2 years ago, he is the lead for the Malayali Nurses Association. And he has more than 20 years of experience working here in the UK. And he's now currently a deputy chief nurse, and that's very rare, in Airsdale NHS Foundation Trust. and he is the co-chair of the National Advanced Clinical Practitioners Inclusivity Team. And what strikes me with Sajan is he was able to lobby with his community the health surcharge, because again, that is an extra expense for our international nurses. So they wrote to the health secretary and lobbied to the Home Office secretary, and this was successful. And I'd like to introduce Susie as well, who is currently a headache nurse specialist at UCLH. This video, I've specially wanted for you to watch. So if you could click on this, Sach. Are you able to show the video?
Sliding door moments in our lives. Moments when, unbeknown to us, life-changing decisions are being made.
Ash is not going to
Mine
show
came when
here.
I was a young mother of 21, finding it hard to make ends meet. I
It's not
vividly
showing the video.
remember that moment.
Sorry, can you guys hear this?
We can hear, but there is a video.
Yeah. Oh,
It's not going to show here. You will have to go to the website where it's showing and share screen for that.
sorry, we will share this link to the participants.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
that okay? Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's the best option if you can share the link.
Oh, okay, that's fine. And I would have wanted you to hear Susie's journey from someone who, and the title of this video was about Milk or Manila. And she talks about her struggle to come even before in applying before coming to the UK. And she's a young mother. And actually she had to choose between paying that fare to pay for getting her to Manila, and it's entitled Milk or Manila, or buy that milk for her daughter. And that was a story 20 years ago. And now she is a very good and well-known headache nurse specialist, and she has published a lot of things, and that's her contribution to the specialty. She has also been awarded the RCN Award for Innovation last year. And because of that, she's thriving. Again, with the right support, she was able to come through that poverty and become a success story. And last on this lineup that I've chosen is Sutranka. And you might have heard of her, but of course she started in CNO, the CNO team in England as a deputy chief nurse when I met her, but now she is the CNO of Wales. But she is an internationally educated nurse from South Africa. And a little bit about her. She took up that post in 2021 as the Chief Nursing Officer for Wales and Nurse Director of NHS Wales. And she has a responsibility for quality and nursing policy at Welsh Government. So an international nurse influencing policy. And she has 30 years of varied nursing experience, which focused on quality improvement, human factors, and patient systems. And she's also an honorary professor of the University of Surrey and Cardiff University. And she's listed in 2020 as the Health Service Journal's 50 most influential people in health. And that really makes us proud, having to see someone like Sue, who's an international nurse, contributing to the wider healthcare system, not only in England, but now in Wales. Next slide, please. And I suppose what the vision that we have with the different associations and the different communities of international nurses coming together is that they came to the UK to care and to belong and to thrive. And that was our hashtag last April when we had the second event where we wanted to be seen, be heard, and be recognized. And I think it's an appeal to everyone that in one way or another, how these international nurses are able to come to this country and contribute in their way, even from the very shop floor where they are working in wards to arrange up to being CNO. I think is a good journey for most who have come to the UK. And for me, I had the honor of meeting King Charles III in February when he sent out this reception to recognize Southeast Asian contribution. And never in my life would have I expected that, to get an invite to Buckingham Palace and meet the King is a privilege and an honor, but at the same time, that really gives one the feeling that you are valued and that you are recognized. And I hope that this gives you a flavor of the different nurses that have come to the UK, and thank you for listening. Such a shame the other one that I would have wanted to play was, but the video is not there.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you. I watched the video and it's very interesting and inspiring. And I've sent a link to the people who are, sent a link in a chat box, and people who are interested, they will be watching in their own time. But thank you very much for this lovely presentation. And our next speaker is Julia Wood. Julia provides quality improvement training and support to NHS organizations and teams. Julia has worked for the NHS at a national, regional, and local level, and very much enjoys supporting individual teams to make improvements. Unsurprisingly, she always makes sure that joy in work forms part of any training and support she delivers. And so today she is going to talk about joy in work. Julia, please.
Yes, I'm unmuted. Lovely. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for inviting me along to talk at this event today. So what I'm going to talk to you about is about joy in work. So next slide, please, Ash. But this is the response I usually get when I start talking about joy in work. And this is because people think, well, Julia doesn't know anything about the job I do. She doesn't know the stresses which I work within on a daily basis. And you know, you're absolutely right. But Ash, next slide, please. But we do hope to feel joy and happiness at work. So 90% of us would like to feel happy, but not that many of us actually do. Next, please. And this really matters because we spend over 90,000 hours on average at work in our lifetime. So this is 1/3 of your entire life. So even though I might not understand your situation and your job, I think we should all agree that because we spend so much time at work, we should try to make that as happy as an experience as we possibly can. Next slide, please. So I just want you to think about, and you might want to pop it in the chat so you can share it with other people. What brings you joy at work? Have a think about that because it kind of sets the context for the presentation. And just think about the things which make you happy at work. And what people usually say to me are things like caring for patients, knowing that you've, really helped somebody, or people talk to me about the fact that they love working with their colleagues and you know, all those type of things. So, but do ever think about it and do pop it in the chat if you wish to do so. Next slide, please. The other side is to think about what makes you sad or irritated at work, because what we want to do, if at all possible, is to reduce those things and actively look at how we can reduce those things. Now, some things are very difficult to change, aren't they? We all know that, whereas some things are. And I think some things are a lot easier. And I think it's thinking about those things within your gift which you can change. Next slide, please. Now, Ash, this has kind of 6 bullet points, so you might just want to pop them all down. It might make things easier. So the thing is, though, lots of people think about joy in work as being a nice to have and that it's nice and fluffy. But the reality is it's really, really important that we're happy at work. So, for example, purpose-driven work increases engagement, but it can also lead to a risk of burnout. And, you know, so many people who work in the NHS are purpose-driven. You know, people have a real calling, and we've heard that today about how passionate people are. But there is a risk that tips into burnout. Now, when you've got engaged staff, that's brilliant, isn't it? Organisations love to have engaged staff because it does lead to higher patient satisfaction, with more patients reporting that they're treated with dignity and respect, which is brilliant. But on the flip side, high levels of stress, or those who are purpose-driven, are associated with errors that can harm patient care. And actually, and I couldn't believe this when I first came across it, that in the acute sector, it's also associated with higher levels of mortality. So certainly joy in work is not a fluffy thing to do. It's a must-have, really, on many levels. And then, of course, there's incivility. So civil environments matter because they have been proven to reduce errors, reduce stress, and foster excellence. And it is about how we can be more civil to each other. And then, you know, stresses at work from an individual perspective can lead to anxiety, anger, unethical behaviour, poor decision making, and chronic exhaustion and burnout. Now, when I'm talking about unethical behaviour, I'm not, in my view, it's not really intentional unethical behaviour. It's when people are having to do workarounds because the system isn't working well, or people have so many jobs on the to-do list to get done that it's really, you know, you end up cutting corners a little bit just to get through the day. So I think it's just thinking about these things as we move through this presentation. The other thing is stress is contagious. So I don't know about your environments in which you work, but if we take, for an example, working on a ward, one person is really stressed, and even though they might not be aware that other people are picking up on it, they actually are. And soon enough, you've got quite a group of people who are all feeling quite stressed when most of them weren't initially. So stress is contagious, but that's the same as the way happiness is contagious. So that has a flip side as well. Next slide, please, Ash. And there's 3 bullet points on this. So from an individual perspective, so, you know, from an organisational perspective, all those things matter around it, does affect patient care. But from an individual perspective, chronic work stress is associated with cardiovascular disease, hypertension, heart attacks, addictions, cancer, diabetes, and more severe mental health problems, including depression. So from an individual perspective, making your working environment as positive as you can really does matter. And of course, we have compassion fatigue. So those most at risk of compassion fatigue are those people who are working in medical and mental health care providers, who are caring for patients day to day, which again, many of you are. And of course, in the NHS, I'm sure you're aware of this already, but the most reported reason for sickness absence is anxiety, stress, depression, and other psychiatric illnesses. And while colleagues are off because they're suffering from anxiety and depression, the people who are left are having to try and deliver, which then makes them anxious and stressed. So it's this kind of this catch-22 situation which we find ourselves in within this. Next slide, please. And the other thing is, which makes matters worse in many ways, is we're actually hardwired to focus on negative things. So I don't know whether you've noticed, you might have had a really good day one day, but one person has said something negative to you, and someone will say to you, how was your day? And you'll say, well, it was great, but, and you launch into the negative straight away. We built like that, and it's about how we try to overcome it. Next slide, please, Ash. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to very, very briefly share with you two approaches which have been developed. So the first one is called 15 seconds, 30 minutes. It was developed by Professor Rachel Pilling and Dan, she's an ophthalmologist at Bradford Teaching Hospitals, and Dan Wadsworth. So he also worked at that organisation. He doesn't now, but he's still involved in the 15 seconds, 30 minutes work. So I'm going to share with you some very brief information on that. And then I'm also going to share with you the IHI framework for improving joy in work. Next slide, please, Ash. Could we try and play the video by clicking on the link there? I don't think we've got sound. It's okay though, you can get the gist, but the music's quite nice. So there we go. So that video it's lovely with the music. So do have a listen to it. But
would you be okay to share the link as well, please?
Yeah, the link's on the bottom of the slide, so that can definitely be shared. That's no problem. So the gist of that is the 15 seconds, 30 minutes approaches. Don't get too hung up about the numbers, but it's about thinking of things you can do now, which will impact on other people later on and might save them more time. So an example might be putting your phone number on the bottom of your email signature, you know, those sort of things. So there's lots of filling photocopier up with photocopier paper when it's run out, so the next person who might be really busy could just come along. So it's really small things which could make a big difference. Next slide, please, Ash. So the thing about the last approach which I showed you is anyone can do that, and I think some of us just do it automatically, but we might not think about it when we're feeling a bit stressed. So it's actively thinking about things we can change. Then we've got the IHI framework for improving joy in work, and this is a much more detailed approach. It can be looked at from an organisational or team perspective, but it goes into a lot more detail. If you're interested in finding out more about that, do just Google it and it'll come up. The IHI website, you do need to be registered to view, but that's fine. You can, it's free, and you get access to loads of other resources as well. So if you're not registered, it's definitely worth doing. So they're just two approaches which you're interested. If you're interested in what I'm talking about, definitely go and have a look, or contact me direct and I can direct you to different things. Next slide, please. What I did want to focus on is kind of, this has been mentioned throughout today so far, but one of the key things across all of this is about wellness and resilience and the importance of self-care. I'm not going to go into all of these in any detail, but the one I really want you to focus on is the one in the top left about self-care not being selfish. It's really important that, I think, people who work in the NHS give so much and they put other people first. And I think that's because of the type of people we are when we go to work in the NHS. We givers, aren't we? We want to care for people, but you do need to care for yourself. And I know this has already been said, but it's so important that you need to care for yourself so you can look after others. Next slide, please. The other thing is resilience. This has already been talked about today, but I'm not going to go into resilience in any detail. What I do want to say is, though, I've met some of the most resilient people I've ever met who work in the NHS. And I think one thing is you should never think you're not resilient enough, because I reckon you are. And I think the other thing is, though, is there's research written about people who are super resilient, staying in situations and in roles which aren't quite right for them. So it's just thinking about that. It talks about this article in the Harvard Business Review. It talks about the fact that people will stay in a job which isn't the right fit for them far longer than they would a bad relationship. So it's just thinking about that. And this isn't on about leaving the NHS or anything. So it could be just about shifting roles into something which is a better fit. Next slide, please. And this is just about getting started. So, you know, if you're looking at working with others around this, you know, the 15 seconds, 30 minute approach, you can do that by yourself, just for you. But the other thing is, if you go onto their website, there's a whole host of resources on there about how you can run a 15 seconds, 30 minute workshop. But also for the Joy in Work, the IHI approach, they talk about this as a starter. So the starting point, if you're working at this as a group, is asking staff what matters to you. And when I do this, I ask what does a good day look like, and what gets in the way of a good day? And those questions are a really good starter, because they help identify the frustrations. And people refer to this as kind of the pebbles in your shoes, so those daily frustrations which happen on a regular basis, because they're the ones which mount up. And then it's about collectively having a commitment to make Joy in Work a shared responsibility. So this isn't about you said, we did. This is about you said, and together we will. And it's about looking at how collectively you can change things. And if there's things you can't change, it's about escalating those, but focusing on the things you can. And, you know, it talks about using improvement science or quality improvement tools and methodologies to help improve Joy in Work. But, you know, a lot of these things are quite fixable without having to do that. So don't feel that you need to be a quality improvement guru to enable this to happen. Sometimes it's just sitting down and having a chat about it. Next slide, please. So identifying frustrations and root causes. People often say to me, you know, those initial conversations, well, how do we do that? So you can do it as a group, you can do it as a one-to-one. Sometimes people want to have the opportunity to anonymously raise things, so you can, like this board in the middle, you can have like an irritations board, and then it's just asking the reasons why people feel that way. It goes back to communication and those questions. Next slide, please. And this was developed for firefighters, but I love it. So if you're wondering how to start this, either for yourself or as a team, having a look at this and just thinking, where do we sit? And what you will find is you will move each day, possibly, but you'll tend to have a place where you or your team sits. And it's about, well, what is causing us to be, say, in the struggling part of this, and what can we do to move ourselves further up, so we can hopefully at some point or on some days get into that thriving area. So as I say, you can do this as an individual and do it as a group. I do it as both, and I just find it really worthwhile. So that's a tool you might want to use. Next slide, please, Ash. And just one thing, if you don't take anything away from my presentation, I'd like you to take this away. It's about smile more. So even if you've got your camera off, still smile. That would be great, because smiling actually makes us feel happier. And this is research which tells us this. Even if you're not happy, so even if you're forcing your smile, it actually send something to our brain to say that we're actually enjoying it more than we think we are, and it gives us a positive position on it. Well, basically just smile more, because it makes us happier. Next slide, please. So my question to you, and if you wanted to put any thoughts in the chat, please do so, but don't feel like you have to, is about what you will do now. So you know, you've heard from a lot of speakers already today as well. So it's about what those takeaways might be in terms of how we can look after ourselves and the people who we work with better. Next slide, please, Ash. And just to say thank you very much for your time today. I hope you found that useful. Do follow me on Twitter. If you want to ask me any questions, do just send me an email. I'm very happy to have a chat with anybody about this. Thank you.
Julia. Thank you, Julia. Thank you very much. Now I would like to ask Professor Julie McGarry to introduce our last speaker. Julie?
Perfect. Right, I'm unmuted now, so I'm just smiling away, so that's good. Okay, thank you very much. What a great afternoon. I would like to introduce our last but not least speaker, Chris Morley, who's the Chief Nurse at Sheffield Teaching Hospitals NHS Foundation Trust. Chris has been Chief Nurse at Sheffield Teaching Hospitals since October 2018, having previously been Chief Nurse at the Rotherham NHS Foundation Trust. Prior to this, Chris was Deputy Chief Nurse at Sheffield Teaching Hospitals, where he's previously held a number of leadership roles in healthcare governance, patient safety, and nursing management. Chris possesses a BMed Sci in Professional Nursing Studies from the University of Sheffield and an MSc in Health and Social Care Leadership from Sheffield Hallam University. Chris is a visiting professor in the College of Health and Wellbeing and Life Sciences at Sheffield Hallam University. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much. I think I'm unmuted now. I didn't have the permission, but Ash has thankfully given me the permission. So first of all, happy International Nurses Day, everyone. And I hope everyone is having a good day. Certainly after this afternoon, I hope you're all feeling inspired. I think we've had an incredible afternoon, and I think all the speakers we've heard from have really given us some thought-provoking ideas to take forwards, and I just thought I'd recap on some of those as part of the close. So first of all, I was just going to say, in terms of leadership, I noticed that I'm still using the same profile photo that I had 6 years ago when I was in Rotherham. So perhaps need to update that, otherwise I'll be done for the impersonating a much younger person. So that made me smile. So that's reminded me of Julia's closing message. And going all the way back to the start of the session with Karen, who up until recently was a very close colleague of mine. And I think it is worth us remembering on International Nurses Day that we are the most trusted profession. We are recognised by the public as people they can turn to at their greatest need and be safe with us. And that's really important. But I do think that then links through to some of the other things I've heard from speakers throughout this afternoon, which is often, as a result of that, we then prioritise others' needs over our own. And I think we heard from both Gavin and Julia about the importance of looking after ourselves. So Gavin, in his session, talked very much about self-compassion and the importance of self-compassion. And Julia made the point that self-care is not selfish. So if we don't look after ourselves, then we can't look after others. So I think that is a message that I would ask everyone to take home today. In terms of Steve's session, I was really interested, and I put a comment in the chat about that and what he found. Steve mentioned networks, and when I became a chief nurse in Rotherham, as Julie kindly highlighted, there was the opportunity to join an action learning set of new chief nurses. So seemed like a good opportunity, and Steve's point about networks and how important networking is, I was grateful of the opportunity. So I went off, joined this action learning set, and one of the colleagues on there was another new chief nurse called Sue Tranker. And Sue was highlighted by Jenny as an inspirational nurse, and she truly is. And I know she's an inspirational, internationally educated nurse, but she is just inspirational. And it has been my great privilege, really, to be able to spend some of my career as chief nurse interacting with Sue on her journey and seeing where she is. And I've just dropped her WhatsApp this afternoon just to let her know that that she has been mentioned in this today. And in fact, she's just come back to me to say happy International Nurses Day to all colleagues in South Yorkshire. Lovely to hear. Thanks for the feedback. So if Jenny's still on the call, I'll make sure that I drop her a note back to say it was Jenny that mentioned her in this talk. But I think in terms of Steve's talk, when we talk about making nursing the invisible visible, I think an important part of that is nursing leadership. It really resonated to me when Steve said most of us don't come into nursing to end up in leadership roles, and that's absolutely true for me. I don't think I ever thought that I would be anything other than a staff nurse, so I still don't quite know how I've ended up here. But I do believe that nursing needs leaders. It needs leaders at every level. And I know there are many great leaders on this call. So thank you for what you're doing. But for others, I would really think about it. We do really need to promote nursing and nursing leadership. Another area where I think we need to continue to strive to do more is in research. And I think Gail set that out very clearly in her talk. And I was speaking this morning to a colleague who reminded me that for patients, even if you're in a research trial and stratified to the non-intervention arm of the trial, you are still statistically likely to get better care than you would have done otherwise. So the rationale for research is high. It has benefits, as we heard, for patients, for staff, for retention, for the quality of care we deliver. We've seen what a difference research can make. So again, I think this is an area of challenge for all of us across South Yorkshire to really up our game in terms of research. Julie's just on my screen at the moment. I can see her. She's doing lots with Parveen across the organisations and South Yorkshire to really take us forward on this, and that's a journey that I think we should continue over the next few years. I think in terms of Gavin, his talk, as well as the self-compassion, the importance of that, I think what's really important and what I'd stress today is the importance of teams talking together. And quite often in nursing, teams come together that will only work together once. That may be a shift, and there may be someone who will never work in that area again. So talking about how you're going to work, how you're going to deliver that shift, how you're going to work together, what's important, what you're trying to achieve is a key metric. And I noticed Gavin cited Michael West, and I was fortunate enough to hear Michael recently, and he absolutely stressed that the importance of teams talking together, working together, talking about how they work together is critical. And the other thing that struck me was about making sure that we humanise both our patients, but also our colleagues. And unfortunately, sometimes you can hear people say, oh, I'm going to contact HR, I'm going to get the F1 down. And these aren't HR or F1, they are all individuals. And I think it's really important that we try and retain that and retain people's individuality. When we dehumanise either our patients or our colleagues, it can lead to incivility, which again was a core element mentioned by Julia. So I think Jenny really helped set out the work that she's been doing and the challenges for international nurses, internationally educated nurses. And it was really heartening to see the number of international nursing and midwifery support groups. We're very lucky in Sheffield. Sally Nzenda, sorry, I probably said that wrong, but Sally, who works in our infection control team, is the vice president of the Kenyan Association. And I know that's bringing us many benefits for our nurses who work in that team, but also our Kenyan nurses. And I know there are lots of others. So I think that highlighting that and people being able to link into those networks is really important. And then finally, Julia, so that was really interesting, and I'm trying to smile lots. I try and smile lots anyway, but particularly now that Julia has reminded me of the importance of that. One of the things that she highlighted though was what matters to you. And that's something that I've heard a lot about in Sheffield. We have a GP that works as part of our management team, Ilanthi Fowler, and she talks about what matters to you. It works really well for patients as well as staff. So if you think about individual patients and checking what matters to them, because sometimes we make assumptions about what matters to patients and it isn't necessarily the most important thing. They might be striving to get to their daughter's wedding and that's the most important thing to them. So having an operation 2 weeks before then doesn't matter to them. They want to get to their daughter's wedding or something similar. So I'd really ask you all to consider using that term, what matters to you, whether you're interacting with your colleagues or with your patients or indeed your family and friends. So finally from me, I just want to say a huge thank you. It's been a great afternoon, a great event, great to have it on International Nurses Day. So a big thank you to all those that have organised it. I know key to that has been obviously Parveen, Ash and Julie. So thank you very much. I've found it a really inspiring way to continue to connect, not only with colleagues who are on the call, but generally the nursing fraternity. And it made me WhatsApp Sue. So if nothing else, that's helped me bring some joy to her, hopefully, and her to me. So thank you very much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. And I think I'm handing back to Julie.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much. And I just want to make 2 announcements. One is if you would like to get a certificate of participation, please complete the Google form, which is shared by Keely in the chat box. And next, we are seeking a permission from all speakers. Once we given the permissions from the speakers, we will share the slides with you. And now I finally invite Julie to conclude and say thanks to all participants who are here. Julie.
Okay, so and Parveen as well, if there's anything you want to ask. So just really, I think just to thank everybody who's attended today, all our presenters, Ash, Parveen, particularly, you know, for everything in organising the day. And I think our speakers today have really said it all, and having entered the NHS 42 years this month, myself, I'm still as passionate today as I was, if not more so, about nursing and our contribution to the NHS. So that's really all I wanted to say. Just a huge thank you, and thank you all for your contributions. Parveen, was there anything that you wanted to add?
I would just echo, thank you, everybody. And while, I mean, I'm conscious that while we have been talking about the examples of NHS and nursing from the UK, but we do have audience from internationally from across the world. And I think the problems, the issues, the successes, the things that we share, no matter where we are pretty much similar. We may be speaking different languages, we may be speaking, working in different healthcare systems, but the way things happen and the way we experience are pretty much similar. So I hope there was something to be useful for everybody. And it makes me smile that today we have had retained at least about, we've got 65 participants now. We've had more, nearly 80 participants at some point in time, 75, 74 constantly during the call. And that has been great. Comparing a time in 2014, 15, 16, when I was doing International Nurses Day, and even in STH and other places, people were asking, what is International Nurses Day? Why do you know, there was no, it didn't used to be celebrated the way, like with with different sort of discussions and stuff. And today we have got all those responsible in both of the hospitals involved in, so that's really great. I would like to also thank you, Keely, for all her support and in organizing the sessions and for joining us today, despite not being really well. So thank you, Keely, for that. Thank you, everybody. We do have few minutes, and I'm conscious that we didn't ask people for giving people opportunity to ask any questions. So if anyone would like to make any comment or ask any questions to any of our speakers, I think that's your chance to do it. So just raise your hand and we can let you speak. It could be a question, it could be just a comment as to what did you think, or did you want anything else, or anything really. Come on, take the chance when it's been given to you. Okay, so we have got one hand. Let me, Hafiza. I'm just going to unmute you, give you the, yes, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Parveen and Aish and other your teams. It was a brilliant webinar, and I was listening to you throughout since you started, and I'm looking forward. We'll have a more this kind of webinars and celebrations for the Nurses Day, and we have to pay a lot of tribute to the nurses, especially when they were working in such a tough time. And it's amazing, you know. We should respect our nurses and do more for them. And that's very good to see you all and listen to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Hafiza. Do tell us where you are based and what do you do?
Parveen, I am the research nurse for the South Asian community, and this is a new job has been created to give the awareness to the unrepresented community like South Asian community, other ethnic minorities. So it's a new job and new role for me, and I'm also learning, and I need all of your support. And when it's any project I need to just come, and looking forward to work with everyone collaboratively. And
yeah, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Anybody else who would like to make a comment or question? Or just tell us how rubbish we were, and I will edit that video.
I think 2 hours were enough. And
Sonia?
we just want to go and enjoy the rest of the day and enjoy celebrating International Nurses Day.
Oh, Sonia has her hand up.
Yeah, there is one more hand. Sonia, yeah, you oh, hang on, I've lost you. Okay, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Okay.
Yep.
Hello, I enjoyed the presentation. I'm from Barbados, but I'm presently a student at the University of Sheffield, completing my master's in international health management and leadership. I'm a registered nurse and a registered midwife, and I'm the head of nursing at the Barbados Community College in Barbados. And I really enjoy your presentation. It shows that the issues are global and not unique to one local context. So thank you, and happy International Nurses Day.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. I mean, if people wouldn't mind, would you be okay, and as many as possible, to put your camera on if you can take a photo, if that's okay. And while you do that, I'll try and figure out how to take a photo because I have forgotten. Screen. Yes. Yes, I have managed to figure out how to do this. So if we have got cameras on, we can do that. And I'm going to stop live streaming.